Why isn't she here?
I'm Doug Connor. I was a first lieutenant in the Army. I was surgical ICU nurse at Walter Reed Hospital, and then at Mosul, Iraq. I was from a military family, and I had served enlisted for about 9 years. And I was working as a civilian ICU nurse in California. And while I was enlisted, I had been an Arabic linguist with an MI unit, so I thought I had something to offer. I didn't believe in the war, the initial invasion, but I thought that with my medical training and language skills, I'd be able to help both American and Iraqi patients. So I headed up to Walter Reed, and as some of you know, there were problems there. It was pretty noticeable. I worked at a small hospital in California, and the facilities where I worked, this is supposed to be the flagship of military medicine in the U.S., and they were the worst conditions I'd seen in any of my clinicals as a nursing student or working as a nurse. We had a 13-bed surgical ICU. There was only one room that was really big enough to house all the equipment and have space for maybe a visitor, basically enough space to work. We had two four-bedrooms that were separated only by curtain privacy barriers, which made infection a really big problem up there. Acinetobacter basically ravaged the whole unit. The kidney transplant team wouldn't recover their patients there because they had a patient contract this Iraqi strain of Acinetobacter and died. This was brought to the attention of everyone that was there, nothing was done. We were lacking equipment to include just basic analgesia for patients who had lost their limbs and were in pain. There was a constant struggle with the administration to try and get more equipment. They didn't. Some of the basic life-saving equipment, rapid infusing machines to put blood and fluids in someone who's been injured, were either non-existent or they only had one for the whole hospital. So my experience at Walter Reed was not very good, and it was clear to me that with all the support of the troops, bumper stickers, that it really didn't mean anything because, let's face it, when someone gets blown up, it costs money to take care of them properly, and they're all used up at that point. As far as our administration is concerned. So I actually volunteered to go to Iraq, and I was with the 47th Combat Support Hospital out of Fort Lewis. Bob Diamondback. We took care of 90% of our patients were Iraqi, most of them civilian. And every sort of human injury you can think of, we saw there. The way it worked with Iraqi civilians was we would take care of them if we caused the injury. It was supposed to be also life and limb, risk of life and limb if we didn't treat them, but that kind of went out the window because there were so many people that needed treatment when our soldiers would go on patrol that we couldn't take all of them. But on a very regular basis, we were co-located with a strike brigade from Fort Lewis. We were getting patients in that had been shot at checkpoints or right at our gates. And just before I left St. Louis, I was going through getting all the processing done, and there was a unit that was returning. And one of the soldiers, I had to go to the front "Oh, where are you going, sir?" And I said, "Bob Diamondback." That's Ford Operating Base Diamondback. He said, "Oh, we just got back from there." And it was an NCO. He said, "Word of advice, sir, if it looks funny, kill it." And I remember in my mind, I've been in the infantry and enlisted. Wow, this guy's really burnt out, ooh, good time to get back from this deployment. What I found out over there is basically everyone gets burnt out. The unit we replaced there was, completely, they were toast. They were just, here are the keys. They're supposed to have this 2-week transition where we learn our job. Basically, they just stayed in their little huts and waited to get fly out. And we basically became the same as our deployment might be. Some of the grosser problems that we had while we were there was, as everyone else has mentioned, even in the medical community with doctors, nurses, psychologists, we fell into the racism as well, calling everyone Haji. It was always different when we triaged patients, whether they were American, Iraqi civilian, or Iraqi Army. And we had 3 OR tables. So say when a bombing happens and there are 45 plus surgical patients that come to the hospital, triage gets very tricky. And it was always Americans first. And we even started breaking it down by where we were. There were also Kurds, and they were pretty friendly to us. So they would get in before Arab Iraqis. It got to the point where we started calling the Iraqi patients, we call them range balls, because just like on a driving range, you don't care about losing them. So, when I went over there, my intentions were very good, and I myself fell into this depression and this racism as a coping mechanism. And I can only imagine, I was in my 30s and I'm a medical professional, that if this was affecting me this way, what would it do to the rest? Actually, walking in here today, I just saw one of my Specialist Ramsey, whose tombstone is right over here from the 47th Combat Support Hospital. He was a soldier in my unit, and he was evacuated because he was suicidal, which doesn't happen very often in Iraq. People tell people they're suicidal all the time. That's usually not a ticket out, so he must have, I don't know the whole story, but he was evacuated back to Fort Lewis in Madigan. A week later, we found out he had shot himself in his parents' house. And we were all surprised. What was he doing in his parents' house? Well, they let him go back home. Walter Reed, I guess what I'm trying to say is the healthcare system is not set up for people. It's not set up for soldiers. In fact, it seems to me there's almost a conspiracy to not treat soldiers, because it makes you think about going back into the Army. If your healthcare is so dismal, when you get out, the VA is supposed to take care of you, it's so dismal. I'm not talking about the individual workers in the VA system, I'm talking about the system as a whole. And I had so many patients that would tell me, 6 months later, these are amputees, or family members telling me about patients with traumatic brain injuries that hadn't received benefits yet. They were still deciding whether they would receive them. Now this is clear cut, triple amputees, triple amputee. There shouldn't even be a question. But that's what's going on right now. military right now does not, if you're a whistleblower or you're trying to make things better, really doesn't help. I wrote letters all the way up to the now Surgeon General of the Army, emails, and their chain of emails asking for equipment, etc. I was retaliated against, and none of the recommendations ever came through. It was keep your mouth shut, Lieutenant, do your job, work with what you have. In closing, just we need a better VA system. Anybody that can, any of the candidates that are up there need to put that forward. There are people right now who are killing, soldiers are committing suicide, alarming rate, 18 a day, and there's a reason. This war is very, very stressful because there's no clear end in sight. There's no mission, no clear mission. Thank you.
Welcome everybody to Northwest Winter Soldier. Before I begin my testimony, if you are a Vietnam veteran, member of Veterans for Peace, Vietnam Veterans Against the War, can you please stand up? For you all to be here. You're the ones who have helped guide us, and this is where the original Winter Soldier in 1971 in Detroit was organized by Vietnam Veterans Against the War, and unfortunately we have to do a second Winter Soldier. Hopefully this time around we'll get it right. We don't have to do this ever again. But basically, my name is Anand Suarez Diaz, formerly Agent 3 Suarez Diaz. I was a Navy hospital corpsman stationed at Camp Pendleton, California. I have a Navy Commendation Medal with Valor and a Purple Heart. And, I was in Ramadi, Iraq, from September 04 to February 05, and I was stationed with a weapons company, which is basically the company with Humvees with machine guns on top. And basically, flat out, before I went to the Iraq war that has turned into an occupation, I was against it. I viewed it as racist. And at that time, I was a liberal. I didn't agree with Bush, and I didn't want anything to do with it, but I felt it was my duty as a corpsman to save lives, Iraqi or American, and whoever it may be, and I was able to do that in Iraq. And basically, it was very confusing times. Everything happened so quickly, I remember before we left to Ramadi, our commanding officer, he got the whole company around, it was this baseball field, and we're just kind of there, and he kind of gives this whole, patriotic, motto, talk like, look around you, look to your left and right, these are your brothers, and not everybody that you see right now, they're not going to come back. And, it kind of, thinking about it, and I'm like, wow, we're getting into something serious, and, you don't know how war is until you've been in a combat zone. And we went to Ramadi, which is a part of the IVAW province, and at that time it was during the height of the Sunni insurgency. That was during the time when, we completely leveled and destroyed Fallujah. And I remember getting into Ramadi. The second day that we were in Ramadi, we got into a huge firefight in the downtown area of Ramadi. It was called the Souk. And I remember just, we're in a Humvee driving down, and all of a sudden there's IEDs, explosions going off, there's rocket propelled grenades, there's small fires, it's kind of chaotic, people are getting dismounting out of their vehicles. As a corpsman with Marine Corps, I had an M16A4 with my med bag right next to me. I dismounted outside of my Humvee, and I took cover. I was right next to a wall, and I just remember pointing my weapon in a direction where, I didn't see anybody, but I'm like, well, this is the only direction I can point to. And, I remember thinking to myself, like, what the hell am I doing here? Because it's so surreal. And it's kind of, everything seemed like it was going in slow motion, and it was crazy. Throughout my time in Ramadi, I saw a lot of things. For one, a recurring theme that's been going on in this panel is just the overt racism that's within the military, which is institutionalized, and its means to dehumanize the quote-unquote enemy. And when you call everybody that looks Middle Eastern Haji, then it just, it's a form of dehumanization, and it just makes it that much easier to kill somebody. And so that term was tossed around all the time, Haji this, Haji that. There was no respect for Iraqi culture for the most part. I'm not speaking for everybody, in my company or particularly my platoon, but overall, the officers in charge of you and just your instruction, there was no real respect for the culture. I would say the majority of the people that are in Iraq or Afghanistan right now that are occupying it don't speak the language and don't really understand the culture. And, fundamentally, this is an imperialist war. Who is benefiting from it? It's not us that's in this room. It sure as hell it wasn't the people that are speaking in this panel, It's basically, it's an ongoing thing. It happened in Vietnam and it happened again. And they use, they blind people with terms of patriotism and, duty to your country. But in reality, they shouldn't have been there in the first place. And there was my platoon. I was in Whiskey 5. My platoon was a very unique platoon. We were very political, which was great. I was kind of the lefty in the group, and then there was like the extreme right wing, semi-fascist kind of guy. And we would just go in and it was a unique experience. I think my platoon in particular was very mature in a lot of ways, and we would debate politics all the time. Whatever our commanders would tell us what was going on, we would debate that. The people that we would talk to when we went into their homes, getting their side of the story, we would discuss that. What we read on the internet. We would, basically would discuss all these things. And, for the most part, throughout the 6.5 months we were there, there wasn't a clear mission. And the Marines that I served with when I was in Ramadi, a lot of them were involved during the initial invasion. And when they went back, and this is OIF 2, they saw, how quickly that changed, because the people in Iraq are organized. They've organized and they're a resistance force, and they're going to continue fighting and resisting us until the last day that we're there. And just with insane quote pillaging that's going on. I mean, in Iraq, you can get Subway in Iraq. You can get Haagen-Dazs. You can, there's like, and these huge firm bases, when they're saying that we're not occupying Iraq, they have like mini AMC theaters. They have swimming pools. We have the largest, U.S. embassy in the green zone. How are you going to tell us that we're not occupying this country, that, we're just there to liberate the Iraqi people and just leave? Obviously, there's bigger things that they want. It's under the ground, and it's also just controlling that region. And particularly, we're at a time where over 1 million Iraqi people have died due to our invasion and occupation, and over 4,000 U.S. dead. I've had a friend die in Iraq. I myself was wounded, and it's really, I was able to speak to the Iraqi people because when we do house raise all the time during the day, during the night, depending on what rotation we were in. And I live Arabic, and a lot of Iraqi people felt more comfortable speaking to me, and I knew some more Arabic at that time, than they would talk to, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy. And, I would ask them all the time, like, hey, what do you feel about us being here? And, they would say, what, Saddam Hussein was horrible. But at least under Saddam Hussein, we had running water, we had electricity. You can walk down the street and, kids can go to school and not worry about being blown up, walking down the street, or walk, just regular things that we here in our society, in this country, take for granted, the Iraqi people do not have. We have people that have not been to Iraq have no idea how it feels, what those people are going through. It's, you can sympathize, but fundamentally, they're the ones that are suffering the most. And there was a particular platoon in Iraq, in my company, that was notorious killing innocent people. My company, we lost 10 people. One of those people was my friend's. His name was Clifton. He died from a mortar attack on our base that happened every day, but that day they were lucky and a mortar landed right behind him. He was only 19 years old, and he died. And this particular platoon, they lost 2 of their guys. And when you're in combat, you're obviously very tight. You're being shot at. You live with each other for like 24/7 for 7 months, or now you have a year, over a year. And there's one particular incident that I remember. We were doing house raids in the middle of the night. A cordon search throughout the city of Ramadi. We came back and we were tired, exhausted. It was like 3, 4 in the morning. We went into the chow hall looking for some food, and I specifically remember 2 Marines bragging about, telling each other like, hey, did you see me shoot that Haji in the stomach while he was running away? And it was basically, an older guy who was walking home and he was shot in the stomach. There was, I saw an incident to where we were on a convoy going to this army base. We used to be on a base called, I think, COP. And basically, there was a firefight, and there was a family walking down that road, and the Marines opened up in the whole area and basically shot this 12-year-old. She was a 12-year-old Iraqi girl in the stomach. Her mother was shot in the leg, and her father and her brother, they weren't shot, but they were hysterical. And things like this happen every day. And the longer we stay there, the more innocent people that are being killed, the more resistors that were created. You know, put themselves in their shoes. You know, well, put yourself in their shoes. Basically, if somebody in your family was shot, going home, you know, or going to school, going about your business from an occupying force, you're not going to tell me you're going to pick up a weapon and you know, resist the people that are occupying your country? You know? And, you know, just to wrap it up, basically is, you know, it's important for our movement to support GI resistance, because fundamentally as a strategy, GI resistance is fundamentally it's what's going to end these occupations. And it's a movement of people that you know, there is resistance happening. You know, if you look at, you know, Vietnam era GI movement compared to the movement that we're creating now, we're ahead of the times. You know, back then, you know, we're becoming more organized. But my platoon, basically, we refused an order. We had maybe a month left in Ramadi, and our commanding officer wanted us to go through this same route that this platoon in 2-4 did, and the whole platoon squad was completely wiped out and was ambushed. And the commanding officer wanted our platoon, a squad of our platoon, and it would have been me with them on the ground, to do the same route. And we were like, hell no. You know, I have a big ass mouth that I was talking to my brains, I was just like, this doesn't feel good, this is BS, you know, this is wrong, you know. And basically everybody just started, and nobody wanted to do it. And everyone was just walking, talking, and we were supposed to be all geared up and ready to go, and it wasn't happening. And our platoon sergeant, who wasn't feeling it either, he went in and talked to our platoon commander, who was a gunnery sergeant, and talked to the CO, and we were able to well, he canceled that mission. And we were ready to go. So I don't think these are isolated incidences. I think this is happening every day in Iraq, and this is something that the military, you know, Iraq and Afghanistan, I think this is something that the military doesn't want to happen, because it's kind of like lighting a fire, you know, on a prairie. And I think, like I said, the longer that we're in these occupations, you know, the more people will resist, and we need to build this movement. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Tracy Mansell. I'm a high school English and history teacher. My husband Seth, he joined the Army as an infantryman in May of 2002 after losing his job as a salesman at a gun store. He was deployed to Iraq between October 2004 and October 2005, and he spoke a little bit about it already. Before I begin to speak about military families and the toll the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have taken on us, I would like to thank Iraq Veterans Against the War for having Northwestern Soldier and for letting me have a chance to speak. I know that the soldiers that are deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan pay a price I couldn't even imagine, but I think it is important to recognize that families pay a huge price too. When a soldier goes on such long deployments, sometimes lasting 15 months or more, and then sometimes deploying again after only a couple of months, or when a soldier doesn't get the help they need when they come home with PTSD or some other physical or emotional problem, the burden is placed on families to fight to make things right. So thank you, IVAW, for recognizing military families. The Bush administration talks of family values and how we must keep these values intact. Really what the administration is doing is splitting families apart. Think of the over 4,000 mothers and fathers grieving, children without parents, wives and husbands lost searching for answers. And these are just the numbers of families that have lost loved ones due to death. What about the families who get their sons or daughters back physically, but they are not the same person who left? I know Seth is not the same man that left in October 2004. He witnessed and probably participated in activities unimaginable to you or I, but he has to live with this every day and find a way to cope and still be a father and husband. Sometime in the last 3 years, I've come to the realization that instead of trying to fight Seth to find the person he once was, to accept that he has changed and help him cope with the person he has become. I think we are very lucky that we have a great relationship and we found a way to work things out after his redeployment from Iraq. Some couples are not so lucky. I'd like to tell you about my friend Teresa and her husband Jose. Jose was deployed with Seth in the same company. When the guys got back, we wanted to go out and celebrate, very excited. And after a few hours of celebrating, Teresa and Jose started arguing and disappeared. When we finally caught up with them, Teresa, she was shaking up, said that Jose tried to hold her down and choke her in their SUV. When confronting Jose about it, he had no idea what had happened or why Teresa was so upset. So we jump ahead to a couple months later on New Year's Eve, and this time it was a little more violent. This time Jose pushed Teresa downstairs, punched her, slapped her, choked her, pretty much beat the hell out of her. Jose was arrested and placed on barracks restriction. Teresa, trying to be a good military wife, black and blue, approached the chain of command and asked them to take it easy on him. After all, he did just return from a very stressful deployment. Skip ahead a little bit more, 8 months again. This time, however, there's another argument, some more physical violence. This time, though, their 8-year-old son tries to step in to protect his mother, and he's the one that gets the punch to the face. If you haven't figured it out already, Jose and Teresa are no longer together, and their 3 children are without a father now. And after about 12 years of being a good soldier, Jose was dishonorably discharged. And I have to say, their story is not an isolated incident. Many military families are torn apart because of the stress the war is taking on them. I would say that the divorce rate is probably higher amongst military families, but the Pentagon disagrees with me in a recently released report. Sometimes the stress on a soldier can make him go to the extreme. In July of 2005, only a few months before Seth's unit was due to return, an 18-year-old wife from the unit was brutally murdered by her 19-year-old husband. I'm not going to use their names because I didn't know them personally, but the incident had an effect on me and the rest of the wives in the unit. Of course, we were all very shocked and very worried, where our husbands started to come home and stab us, kill us, beat us, you know. We didn't know what the guys had been going through over there. And after all, they are trained to kill. The commanders assured us, all the wives and family members, that when our soldier came home, he would be completely fine, and if he wasn't, there would be help for him, as long as he asked. There's one last thing I want to mention before I end. With wars come baby booms. When the guys returned, many wives became pregnant, and in Seth's platoon alone, there were 6 wives who had miscarriages, one of which was me. Seth and I had been trying for a second child before he even deployed, and you can imagine our excitement when we found out we were pregnant, and then our devastating disappointment with our loss. Thankfully, though, we now have a healthy little Lily who is a year and a half. The question, though, that I have since then has been why. First, my emotions got the best of me, and I asked, why did this happen to me? But after thinking it over and thinking more rationally, I started thinking, why so many miscarriages in one platoon? Is it because of if more people are getting pregnant, there are naturally more miscarriages, or is it another reason? It's my suspicion that our soldiers are probably exposed to depleted uranium, or maybe some other type of biological or chemical agent. Or maybe it could have been the many number of injections they get before they deploy and before they redeploy. As I mentioned before, we were lucky to conceive a beautiful, healthy little girl. But there isn't a day that goes by that I'm not worried about her. I'm always worried that there may be something hidden that we don't know about because of the right deployment that might just one day take her away from us. Finally, I like to say that anyone who has been in the military or part of a military family knows that sacrifice is just another part of the job. You sacrifice your days, sometimes your nights, sometimes you sacrifice birthdays or anniversaries. And you do this without being asked and without complaint, or maybe a little bit of complaint. But what happens when a family or soldier makes the ultimate sacrifice? Where's the help they need and that they desire and sacrifice for? Maybe some of you have heard, or maybe even experienced, the horror stories of the bureaucracy of the VA, being sent from one window to the next just trying to get some kind of help. Or what about the stories of commanders telling their soldiers it's better to stay in the barracks with their buddies instead of going into a treatment program because of the stigma of being on the 5th floor of Madigan, because a soldier who asks for help is not Army strong. Members of the military and their families are there when our country calls for them, but where's our government, the one that they have sacrificed so much for, when they need them the most, to help them return to a normal sense of being? Today, we've all come together to speak in solidarity to end this war, and I say that we mustn't speak on these issues just on special occasions or anniversaries or when the number keeps going up. We must talk about these issues every day. We must speak up in any way that we can, every day, until every serviceman can and we must speak until real family values are back in our country. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Rich, and in 2003, I was a single mother of 3 dynamic children, and I was the head of the Human Rights Commission in my city. No way in the world would I ever think that I'd be sitting here today, a mother of an Iraq veteran against the war, and a war resistor, and a military sexual assault survivor. My daughter joined the military, and people keep saying, how did this happen to you? I was raised on a commune with hippies. How did this happen that you had a daughter who went into the military and went to Iraq? And like Hanan says, it's a very surreal experience. The amazing feeling to watch your baby leave and be deployed to a combat zone is something I don't think I'll ever get over. Seeing her leave, telling her she was my hero, that she was so brave. It's really humbling to be sitting here with everybody today, because I really, every time I meet another Iraq vet against the war, I just cannot get over the feeling of pride that I have for them as I have for my daughter Suzanne. Gosh, the things that Suzanne went through in Iraq I still don't know everything, and I don't think I ever will. She'd call me from Iraq and tell me about, Mom, these people are so dirty. Why are they so dirty? They don't take care of their children. They don't take care of their environment. There's trash everywhere. There's dead people everywhere. And so I had to explain to her, well, Suzanne, it's a war zone. People can't focus on their, the environment if they can't figure out where they're going to sleep or where they're going to eat. What an amazing place for a 19-year-old to learn about hierarchy of needs and what people need to survive and to live. One of the things that, when the recruiter told Suzanne that she would not be deployed to Iraq, I was one of those people that believed them. I didn't know it was a joke that military recruiters don't tell the truth. I really didn't understand that. So she gets to Iraq, and the first day she's there, she reports back to me that her commanding officer is hitting on her. And when Suzanne got back from boot camp, she was all Army. Who the hell is this kid? And I suggested that maybe she'd want to take some things with her to Iraq, and she said, Mom, people don't have sex on deployments. And she was absolutely serious. So when she gets there, this 19-year-old girl in a combat zone, and her platoon sergeant, so that's 5 people above her platoon sergeant looks at her and says, hey, Swift, let's do this. And she said no. She told her equal opportunity officer, he did nothing. So she goes about her business, and she's calling me, telling me about this, about all the guys and what they're saying to her. And she said, Mom, in the Army, women are seen as either bitches, dykes, or whores. She goes, I don't want to be any of those things. I just want to be a soldier and do my job and just be somebody's friend. But you can't do that, is what she would explain to me. one of the things about being a military mom is you can't focus on worrying, because if you worry, then she's going to worry. And my daughter and I are pretty tight, and so I had to be really calm. I never told her I missed her. I never told her I was worried about her. I always said, you be smart. You be smart. You watch out for yourself. You know, you're going to be great. You're doing awesome. I'm so proud of you. Because I knew that if she was worried, if she thought I was worried about her, oh my God, would she be so worried about me? So you just have to hunker down and just kind of put your head down. You look at your cell phone and your computer, because that's one of your lifelines to your kid. And you cancel your newspapers because you don't want to see how many dead people or how many dead soldiers were killed in Iraq today. You cancel your cable service because you don't want the war invading your life any more than it already has on such a, you know, primal level. So Suzanne starts telling me about this, her, okay, not platoon, but her squad leader, and how he is starting to hit on her. And they enter into a sexual relationship that she doesn't want, and she doesn't know how to get out of it, and she's scared. And so finally I start calling my congressman, and yeah, you're right, if their lips move, they're lying. They're lying. They're liars. She tells me about what he's doing to her, and I start asking for help, but she's too scared for me to ask for help for her because she doesn't know what this man will do. It's very interesting that this man's name, his initials are M. Lester. So I always said, how's the molester doing? You know, and I always called him the molester. Back then, I didn't understand what military sexual trauma was. I didn't know there was a term for it. I didn't know what command rape meant. I'm still really just shocked about what happened to Suzanne. And like I said, I don't even know half the things that she really witnessed or went through. You know, things I heard about combat she saw, because she was a Humvee driver. Oh, I shouldn't say what she was, but she was a specialist in the Army with the 66th MP Company from Fort Lewis, stationed in Karbala from February 2004 to February 2005. She drove a Humvee through combat patrol. She was a military police officer. Then she was arrested and then court-martialed her and took away all of her rank, and now she's a specialist still back again because she's earned her rank back, and she's still in the military. What was I saying? I was really shocked by the amount of sexism and racism that was happening in the U.S. Army. The things that Suzanne would report to me about calling people Hajis, and the way that they had to tear people down so they could not see them as humans. And she was very upset when she befriended the interpreters. And the interpreters would go home to their children and she'd tell them about their families and about the interpreters. And one of the interpreters was beheaded when he went home, and they put his head on his car and said, this is what you get for helping the U.S. military. This really choked Suzanne up. Another thing that happened when Suzanne was there is kind of a Pat Tillman death. Her friend Jessie Berger was killed. The U.S. military told the mother that it was a car accident, whereas he was really shot. Then they told her that it was a Turkish army that where the bullets came from, and the Turkish army had no record of that. So to this day, Peggy Berger is still waiting to find out how her son Jesse, who died on May 5th, 2005, died. So Suzanne gets out of the military, and I say, now can we say something about the sexual abuse and harassment that she went through? And she says, no, we can't do anything about that. They start her process to redeploy her 11 months after her initial deployment. And I always have told her, you know, we can get you out of here. Well, get you out of here. If you do not have to go back. And she said, no, I'm going to go back. I'm fine. It wasn't that bad, Mom. You know, and we all know that a lot of the times our vets have to just block everything off, because if you don't block everything off, then you can't be human when you're in the U.S. military. You break down. So she gets ready to go back to Iraq. She's packed and she's ready to go. A lot of you know this story already, so I'll try not to repeat myself too much. And she turns to me and she goes, I can't do it. I can't go back. I said, good, let's get you the hell out of there. So my daughter, who went AWOL, She didn't really do it because she was against the war. She did it because she was scared to death for her life. It wasn't until after she was arrested for going AWOL that she watched the movie Sir, No Sir, and realized, GI resistance, we gotta stop this. This was a war, this is wrong, this is illegal, and this is immoral. And that's when Suzanne stood up for herself and has been standing up for herself ever since, saying no more war. When Suzanne was arrested, we kind of went national with her story of what happened. And I started hearing all these stories about military sexual assault, about women who have been murdered in Iraq after being raped, and the military is saying it's murder, like Lavina Johnson. I have to talk about Lavina and the murders that are happening. I think the Johnson family know of 9 families so far that have young daughters who they were told committed suicide in Iraq. And then they get the pictures, and these women were actually murdered in Iraq. And I always think, God, that could have been Suzanne if she had told about being raped in Iraq. I want to thank everybody for having me here. I'm a member of Military Family Speak Out, Courage to Resist, a proud mother of an Iraq vet against the war who's active duty and starting her own chapter on base. Code Pink.
I am a psychiatrist who specializes in treating veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'm very honored to be invited to be on the panel with these veterans. I'll start by offering a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. "Veterans are the light at the tip of the candle, illuminating the roots of war and the way to peace." And in this spirit, it is so important that veteran voices are heard. And a couple of panelists have mentioned that many of the most severely affected of our veterans are unable to participate in an event like this. And so I feel like one reason that I'm up here is to speak for many of the veterans that I treat who can't do this. And not only are they not able to come up and speak publicly, many of them would be unable to tolerate being in a room with a crowd of this size. I must say that I am not speaking in an official VA capacity. I want to be clear on that. I'm speaking as the President-elect of Physicians for Social Responsibility, PSR. PSR is an organization that's vigorously opposed this war from before it started and works with IVAW and Veterans for Peace and VVAW and similar organizations in coalition. So again, thank you for IVAW for having me, and thank all of you for being here today. What I want to discuss are the true costs of this war. And it turns out that one very large part of the costs of war come in the area of healthcare. And so as a doctor, I want to talk about the hidden wounds and the hidden costs. And many of them are intentionally hidden, because if people knew more about what the extent of the costs are, maybe they'd be less prepared to go to war. So we know about the deaths. We know of the tally of more than 4,000 that are represented by the headstones that we see around the room. Many of the deaths, including suicides, including wounds that are lethal but that people die of after they're evacuated, including the deaths of over 1,000 private contractors. They are not counted. Then there are the wounded, the injured, and the medically ill, totaling over 70,000. And intentionally, those numbers are kept in 3 different categories, and they're hard to find. The ratio of wounded to killed in the current conflicts is much higher than has ever been known before. In Iraq, it is 8 to 1, compared to Vietnam, where it was 3 to 1, or World War II, where it was 2 to 1. And the reason, there are 2 reasons. One are the advances in the body armor, and the second are the advances in battlefield medicine. We can stabilize and airlift people to Landstuhl Air Force Base in Germany within 24 hours, where to compare that in Vietnam, people were treated in the field. It might have been weeks before they get out. So this is a real incredible development. However, we are left with service members who have grievous injuries, people who would never have survived with these injuries before, and we as a society will be paying the costs to care for these grievously injured for the rest of their lives. We have a new word in the clinical lexicon. It is a terrible, sanitized word. The word is polytrauma. We have polytrauma clinics here in Seattle and around the country now, in VA and military healthcare facilities. Polytrauma means people who've been terribly blown up and have multiple severe injuries, missing arms, missing legs, missing hearing, missing vision, burns, fractures, head injuries. Many or majority of these injuries are blast injuries. So we keep putting more and more armor on our personnel and our vehicles, and the insurgents keep increasing the magnitude of the explosive forces. And we are getting a tremendous number of people to care for who are just blown up and have polytrauma from blast injuries. One new phenomenon that we're seeing in large numbers that we don't really yet know how to deal with is the traumatic brain injuries. And these are injuries from a blast wave. They're atmospheric pressure injuries from the great blasts. And we don't yet know much about the real pathology or what's going to happen. It's a new kind of hidden wound that takes its place alongside post-traumatic stress disorder as one of the hidden wounds of war. Recently, the RAND Corporation issued a report looking at a survey of returning veterans, and what they found were 14% were returning with PTSD, 14% with major depression, and 19% with a probable traumatic brain injury. 1/3 of all returning veterans had one of these conditions, and 5% of all returning veterans had all 3 conditions. Now, if you think about the fact that we've deployed over 1,600,000 personnel so far, that tells you that just looking at the PTSD and major depression, we're going to have 300,000 to 400,000 psychiatric casualties. Many of you in this audience are familiar with the symptoms of PTSD, which there are a bewildering array of symptoms. And PTSD is a war wound, no less than is a shrapnel wound. It can be tremendously debilitating. I won't go into detail, but the symptoms include nightmares and flashbacks, triggered physiological and psychological distress, social withdrawal, isolation, avoidance of any kind of reminders of the trauma, emotional numbing, uncontrolled outbursts of anger or rage, difficulty concentrating and focusing, what's called hypervigilance, which the military calls battle mind, which is being extremely watchful and on guard all the time. What would make it impossible for a vet with severe PTSD to just even be in the room with us today. So, one of the things that I see, as they mentioned, are the struggles at the level of family, community, and society that these veterans face. They struggle to maintain marriages, they struggle to maintain jobs. And for me personally, listening to stories of trauma day in and day out, it's my family that helps me cope. So it's ironic and painful for me when I have to listen to stories of disintegrating marriages and families that are torn apart. There was a study that was done prior to the current conflicts that showed that 9% of all unemployment in the country, this is not just veterans, this is everybody, 9% of all unemployment is attributed to combat exposure. 8% of all divorce or separation of everyone is attributable to combat exposure. 21% of all spousal or partner abuse in the country is attributable to combat exposure. War and exposure to combat have devastating effects on our society. Much of this is hidden, and it's up to veterans more than anyone to speak out. And these are the voices we must promulgate, we must hear. In addition to divorce, unemployment, family violence, you see behavioral problems in children, child abuse, drug and alcohol addiction, incarceration, homelessness. These are terrible problems. So they go beyond the individual and they reverberate across generations. I want to mention briefly what we know about suicide. We know that combat veterans, and this is, studies look at all veterans going back to World War I. Combat veterans are twice as likely to commit suicide as people in the general population. And we know that the active duty suicide rate is higher now than it has ever been since it's been measured in the last 30 years. So these costs are staggering. And in the long term, the health care costs of this war, the costs to pay for medical care, for disability benefits, for all of these problems that we will face are greater than the military operational costs of the war. Every day that this war goes on, we accrue more of these costs. And these are costs that not only are we paying now, but we will pass them on to our children and our grandchildren. So again, I thank IVAW for having me. I thank everyone for being here today. And I hope that this event will serve to renew everyone's determination to end this war.
also to interview a lot of these guys for my next book, which is about resistance within the U.S. military against the occupation of Iraq. And I'm up here just to talk to you quickly because, as you know, well, we'll start with the three leading candidates for presidency. John McCain has been very, very clear on what his policy is regarding the occupation of Iraq, that basically it's okay with him if we're there 100 years as long as American troops aren't being wounded or killed. And John McCain is actually the most honest of the three candidates about what his policy is regarding Iraq. Hillary Clinton has a policy that's basically just a continuation of what we have today, of ongoing troops. Maybe we'll redeploy combat troops. No talk about removing the bases, no talk about removing the embassy, and certainly no talk about changing the national security strategy or the Quadrennial Defense Review Report, and of course no talk about Joint Vision 2020, which calls for full spectrum dominance of the U.S. military of the globe by 2020. And then we have Barack Obama. Again, his advisors, while slightly less hawkish than those of Hillary Clinton, are basically talking about maintaining between 50 and 70,000 American troops in Iraq, at least until the end of his first term if he comes into power. Again, no talk about withdrawal of bases, withdrawal of the embassy that's the size of Vatican City, etc., etc. So my point is pretty obvious. We can't rely on any of these three people to give this country. Whoever comes into power in January 2009 and is sworn in is irrelevant compared to these guys. When this occupation ends, it's going to be the same way the occupation in Vietnam ended, and that's with massive, massive protest here at home, coupled with a fierce resistance abroad in Vietnam. It was the Vietnamese resistance. Now it's going to be the Iraqi resistance, and certainly not without a fierce and growing GI resistance, which we're looking at right here today. This is the start of something historical, and they cannot do it without us reporting on it and all of you helping them. And so what's going on here today, it's up to us as independent media and just concerned citizens to get the message out. Maybe there's some of the bigger media in Seattle here today. That's great. I'm going to have a heart attack if there's any national media that's here covering this event tonight. So it's up to us to get it out, because if the average person on the street hear just a little bit of what's been said just on this first panel so far, things would start to change, and I think change rapidly in this country regarding what needs to happen to end this occupation. So I'm up here, my final, that's basically to get you ready for, I want to ask you to support and contribute to the Regional Winter Soldier, to your local chapter here in Seattle. And all these guys here, it takes money to get these people here, money to get them traveling around, talking to people to get this message out, and to support what they're trying to do. Iraq Veterans Against the War has gained, I think it's over 400 members now, just since the March Winter Soldier event. The fastest growing segment of their population are active duty troops. Talk about Iraq and talk about how horrible the situation is over there right now, people ask, what can I do? And I can't think of a better organization to support and a better time to get involved and throw your weight behind these people in any way you can right now. Thank you.